Hi, everyone. It's Junie. I so wish I could be there with you for our first practice lab. We're very excited to try this out. I hope it goes well. And I can't wait to hear from you what it was like. And we will debrief when I get back. But what I wanted to start with, Gail and I wanted to just kind of give you a little bit, set the stage a little and um, have you just think about some of the things that we're going to be working in the practice lab. One of the reasons that we did this is because we wanted to kind of give you in small increments, small doses, uh, some things that you could be thinking about as you're practicing your skills, your counseling and therapy skills. So hopefully we're going to dose this out and you'll understand what we're trying to accomplish here. So the first thing that we want to do is just kind of give you a little bit of an intro to helping. The first thing that what I want to say is that I got a lot of the information that you're going to be um, reviewing or what we're going to be working with throughout all of these practice labs is from this book, Helping Skills by Clara Hill and her colleagues. Clara Hill is like, this is a classic, right? So this is kind of where I learned a lot of my helping skills. And this is a book, a text that has been used for a really long time. So a lot of what I'm going to be saying will be coming from this book. So what Clara Hill and her colleagues say is that helping is a broad and generic term that includes the assistance provided by a variety of individuals, such as friends, family members, counselors, psychotherapists, mental health professionals, and human service providers, right? So helping spans lots of different fields, I think is the point. So when we say, well, often I'll say like that we're all helpers. And, what I'm referring to is that we may play a helping role in lots of different places in our lives. So hopefully some of these skills will not just be about you being in therapy, but that they're things that you can kind of draw from in other aspects of your life. So here's the thing. This is what we talk about. Why is this so hard? Like you've probably been doing it for most of your life. And to some degree, it is an art. And to a big degree, it's also a science. We know a lot about kind of what works and what doesn't work in science. Um, it may feel very intuitive to some of you. I'm thinking a lot of you. But also it may be something that you have had to work on over time before you felt really comfortable with it. And it's also super complicated. So this is what the truth is that it's all of the above, all of these things. So even if it seems like we might be going over things that you're like, duh, I know how to do that. When you actually get into that first or second or third relationship with a client, uh, it may not feel as intuitive or as, kind of easy as you once thought it was. So let's talk about it. So, the other thing I do want to talk about is that when we have any kind of trained helper working with a client, the intersection of that is what we're going to call psychotherapy. So the difference between helping a friend or a neighbor or even a parent and maybe helping a client is that we're actually you are trained and you're going to use some of those skills to help a client, and that's what we're describing as psychotherapy. So what is sometimes we get a little bogged down with some of the terminology. So sometimes we'll talk about counseling and sometimes we'll talk about psychotherapy. So I thought it might be worthwhile to take a minute to figure out what the difference between those two is. So really, the a big difference is how long that relationship that you would have with that client would last. So typically in a counseling relationship, it's a pretty brief relationship. Where psychotherapy, we might go into it understanding that it's going to be a bit more prolonged, that we're going to work together, maybe there's some trauma to unpack, and we know that it's not going to be over in 3 sessions or less. So counseling tends to have kind of what we would call higher functioning clients. Maybe they're coming in to solve a specific problem. Where psychotherapy, there might be some more significant impairment to their daily life. They might be having more trouble functioning, going to work, going to school, that kind of thing. So, and in counseling, the typical issues, the presenting concerns are more what we would call kind of issues of adjustment, right? Like I'm having trouble fitting in at my new job. I'm having trouble fitting in college. I lost a grandparent, and even though I knew that that was coming up, it's kind of taken me down, and I need to kind of process what happened and how it affected my family. So it's kind of, kind of humans being human is kind of how I think of some of these issues. So in psychotherapy, it might be some longer standing issues, unresolved trauma from or conflicts from childhood. We might run into what we would call kind of diagnosed psychopathology. Like maybe I've gotten a diagnosis of generalized anxiety or PTSD, right? So there's more of it might take a bit of time for us to figure out what's going on here, and we're not going to just focus on kind of getting you back into the game. We're really trying to heal some more longstanding wounds. I mean, we're trying to get you back in the game too, right? Okay, so I thought this was a really important point to make to y'all. So I think there's a lot of, I know I've definitely worked in places where we might have some LMFTs, we might have some social workers, we might have some, nurses who have some psychiatric training, PhDs and all kinds of different degrees and level of training and how much training. But what the research shows, y'all, is it doesn't seem to affect the outcome of a therapeutic relationship. So I hope this feels like good news, because I know that sometimes we get into turf wars about who has the better training and who has more training, but it doesn't seem to really affect the outcome of what we're doing. So what we do know is that there is a point where people come to get help that kind of when they're already primed to do some work and to get to a place where they can really work on changing some behaviors and changing some ideas or changing some beliefs that are maybe getting in the way of their well-being, right? So we know that people seek help when, so is it first people have to become aware that they're in pain, and then they have to perceive that that pain is problematic. Okay, like that seems very elementary, but I think a lot of times, I mean, maybe you could even relate to this to yourself, right? We're kind of like, well, I'm showing up every day and it's not so bad. And then, weeks into a problem, I'm still not able to shake off how it feels. So I have to realize that what I'm experiencing is painful, and I have to recognize that that's a problem, right? Because I think a lot of us, especially if you come to this work, or if you are meeting a client who has kind of gotten used to always being in survival mode, maybe, or just like I know how to deal with this, I know how to get through the day, so it may not feel like a problem until it does, right? So we have to be aware that we're in pain, and then that has to be problematic for us in order for us to decide, I think I need to go seek help. So people seek help when that pain becomes greater than the perceived barriers to seeking help, right? So we all know that finding a therapist isn't as easy as it sounds, but I am in so much pain that I'm now willing to figure out how I'm going to find somebody, or I'm going to figure out how I can find people who will help me find a therapist, right? So these are the factors that really have to be in place in order for somebody to seek help, right? So the pain has to be greater than the barriers to seeking help, and then I can actually seek help. Okay, so this is something you can tell your family when they ask you, right? Is psychotherapy even effective? Right? So the average client in psychotherapy was psychologically healthier after treatment than were 79% of the untreated individuals. This suggests that when that pain becomes greater than the barriers and you actually make it to therapy, you are 79%, there's a chance that you will actually feel less distressed after therapy. I mean, I don't think that's too shabby, right? Also, I thought this was super interesting. Neuroimaging research shows positive effects of psychotherapy, right? So when they put you in a PET scan and they start kind of lighting up parts of your brain, um, you're going to have more. They're seeing on those images the result of psychotherapy is maybe making some of that those parts of your brain that are having we're having trouble making coherent cognitions, or the parts of your brain that light up when you are feeling more depressed or anxious. We're seeing changes in those parts of the brain simply by going to therapy. I mean, I think that's pretty powerful, right? Like it's not just medication, but just the relationship that forms in psychotherapy can be have a very positive effect on mental health. So also, I think this is super important as well, and it kind of speaks to why we want to do a training practice labs, because no one type of therapy is it seems that no one type is more effective than the others. So whether we try CBT or we're doing EMDR or we're doing some kind of internal family systems, or pick the modality, what we know is that all of those are pretty equally effective, right? So we'll be talking more and more as the year goes on about why then it's important for you to find your voice and find one of those modalities that, not only is evidence-based, but also fits with your style, your personality, your philosophy of how people change and your philosophy of helping. So any one of those things is going to any one of those modalities, I should say, will be effective if you are effective using them, if that makes sense. So what is the magic, right? So if it's not the modality that I use, if it's not, how how frequently even that I see my counselor, although there's evidence that, getting a proper dose of counseling is important. But what we know is that there are some things that really kind of make up this magic of what is the therapeutic relationship. So in 1991, so this has been a long time and it's kind of held up, Frank and Frank found these common factors. So they identified these 6 common factors that all of those modalities, all of the therapists that they studied had these common factors. So 1, the therapeutic relationship. So the quality of that therapeutic relationship and that bond that people create with their clients, that therapists create with their clients, is the number 1 common theme with all of the different modalities. That there's an installation of hope that happens across all of those different modalities, right? That's partly what we're all trying to do, is give clients hope that it could change or it could be better. New learning experiences, that I might give you what we would call a corrective experience, that, if you've been used to hearing that you can't do something or you're not good enough, or if you were more perfect, then you could then maybe get that thing that you are aiming for. If I can give you a new experience where you start to challenge those beliefs, that is something that happens in all manners of therapy. This emotional arousal. So, I mean, it's not what you think, right? It is this idea that in the therapeutic relationship, I might be able to express emotions that I'm not able to express freely with other people, right? So there's something safe that's happening in that therapeutic relationship in that room. That we offer in the therapeutic relationship this ability for you to practice being able to be assertive, being able to say no, right? We give you an opportunity to practice expressing anger, right? So all of those things in this kind of safe environment will boost your self-efficacy, your ability to do these things that might be hard for you to do in the real world. So we're going to kind of help you build those skills. And then finally, we're going to give you opportunities to practice those therapy skills in real life. So often, what across all these different kinds of therapies, the goal is for you to practice them in real life, and then you come back to therapy and we process how that was for you. Or perhaps you're in group therapy where you really are in kind of a lab with other people practicing how to some of these new skills that you're learning in therapy. Okay, so these are the common factors. So you might have already kind of talked about these in other classes, but these are the things that across, like I said, all different modalities and different treatment types are the factors that really seem to matter most. So we're going to focus today, especially on this therapeutic relationship, right? How do we create a relationship that then makes it possible for all of those other changes or all of those other things, for the client to meet some of those goals? So I just wanted to say this. If you aren't familiar with Irvin Yalom, he is a gem. He's like 94 years old now, and he's just amazing. He's kind of considered the father of modern group therapy. But he says it's the relationship that heals, the relationship that heals, the relationship that heals. My professional rosary. And I just love this because whenever I'm kind of stuck and I feel like, oh, what should I do with this client? I hear Irv Yalom whispering in my ear, it's the relationship that heals. So I hope that you can remember that when you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to master all kinds of different techniques and I have to have worksheets and I have to have this and I have to have that. Really, if you can get back to basics and remind yourself that if I can create a therapeutic relationship, that's really where the magic happens. Okay? All right. So let's focus on building a relationship. That's what we're going to do. So the first skill that we're going to focus on today is building a working alliance. Okay, so what is a working alliance? So I'll just read this definition. So working alliance is the part of the relationship that's focused on therapeutic work. The alliance consists of the bond, that is the connection between the helper and the client, an agreement on goals, that is a consensus about the changes that the client needs, and I would add wants to make, and an agreement on tasks. So a consensus about what's going to take place during the helping process to meet the goals. Okay, so in other words, just to summarize, the three main goals in building a working alliance are to agree on those goals. So you're trying to figure out what does the client hope to get out of therapy? What do you hope to offer the client? And then how are we going to do this dance where we negotiate a set of common goals, right? And some of what we do is help the client set realistic goals, right? Like what is possible in the next 6 months, okay? Second, we're going to assign some tasks. So what will I agree to do as the therapist, and what might you as the client agree to do between sessions, right? I think I'm a little concerned, to be honest, that sometimes I'm noticing people are coming to therapy, and this is fine, to primarily to kind of get off their chest all the things that they felt like they couldn't talk to other people about. And I'm not sure that's what therapies was designed to do, right? Again, from a couple slides ago, right? Like what we're trying to do is help you practice in the safety of that therapy relationship, behaviors that hopefully you will be able to do in your outside life, right? So we want to kind of help you, give you some tasks, or for you to come up, ideally on your own. How can I practice this in real life? Okay, so those are the tasks. And then third, we're going to really work in this working alliance on developing a bond. So that bond is all about creating that psychologically and physically safe space for the client. So we need to figure out and have the client kind of inform us, how can I create that space where you feel less judged than you might feel in your real life, or less scrutinized than you might feel in other relationships. This is where, sometimes mindful self-disclosure, right? So just little bits of self-disclosure can help your clients feel that sense of trust and trustworthiness, right? That if I disclose a little to you, it indicates that I'm kind of a fellow traveler and I'm doing this work with you. And, you know, you have to, we want to reassure that you don't have to take care of me, right? But I can at least facilitate that bond by, suggesting or indicating that I'm not that different from you. Okay. Okay. So all of this added up for me is another thing that I've heard over and over and over again when I was in training, you are the instrument. So what does that mean? So if I'm a musician, my instrument might be my voice. My instrument might be my violin. My instrument might be my, flute. So if my instrument isn't well tuned or isn't well cared for, or maybe I'm sick, I'm not going to be able to do what I need to do to make music, right? So I am the instrument, and therefore I really have to be attuned and tuned into myself. Okay? Because often if I'm having an experience with a client, it probably means that other people are having a similar experience too. So the more that I can be really attuned and understand what I'm experiencing and validate my own experience of a client, the better I will be at helping reflecting things to the client and building that alliance. Like, oh, I can see something's going on here. Let's talk about it. Okay. So what this really kind of gets to is that we're going to hear in a session, I should say, the content of what somebody brings to the session, like what happened, right? We're going to hear, they're going to want to recount or, need to recount like all of the things that have happened in their week or their life or their day, right? And that's the story. That's the story that they're telling us about what's happening. And I don't mean story like they're making it up, but like that is kind of how they're making sense of things. There's also a process that happens in that room while they're telling us their story. And that is, the nonverbals, the feelings, and especially the meaning that the client is making of that story, right? The meaning that's attached to that story. So, of course, we want to be able to understand the content, but really what the working alliance is all about is ensuring that that the client feels heard and seen, and that we're hearing and seeing the client. And a lot of the way that we do that is that we focus on the process and we comment on the process of what's going on in that room. Okay, so this is really what you want to focus on, like what is going on between us that I might want to point out and might want to get some confirmation or clarity on, am I seeing and feeling what is actually happening with the client? And sometimes you might be wrong, right? Okay, so process comments might sound like, what feelings are coming up as you tell me about this? Okay, just curious, how is it for you to talk about all this with me? Or I'm noticing that you seem more tense when you talk about blank. Am I on track with that? Am I, kind of hitting the mark with that? Or am I not quite seeing what you're putting out, right? So this is, you can see that we're commenting on what's actually going on in the room. So this is, I think, how therapy is really different than other kinds of relationships that people ask. Because most of us have been taught, socialized, not to say things about kind of what's going on right then and there in the here and now, because it might make people feel weird. It might be a little awkward. It might be a little nosy. So this is where the relationship, that working alliance is so important, because the more that we can, kind of normalize that these are the kinds of comments that I might be making, and it's okay to talk about what's happening in our relationship, the more that bond develops. Okay. So becoming an ally with our clients is also hugely important. Like if they don't feel like we're on their side, it's going to be very difficult for them to, again, build that alliance or that trust. So becoming an ally, especially in a cultural context, requires that we examine in which ways you might have more power and privilege in this relationship. And then also how you don't have power and privilege and how that might be important to pay attention to. For example, as a woman, right? Like if I'm working with certain clients where there might be some disagreement between, the role of women in the culture and like me being in this position of power, right? Like I want to be respectful and honor that, without being, self-deprecating or say like I don't have any expertise, but really understand that that might, if I'm overstating kind of the power that I do have, or over utilizing the power that I do have, it might um, it might affect that working alliance more for some clients than others. Okay. So what this really comes down to for me is we've, and many of you in class, we've talked about that most people understand um, how to tell if I'm superior to somebody or inferior to somebody based on all of the messages that we get through socialization, right? So I may not think I'm superior to you, but the culture, the environment, the society might say, oh, because you have more education, you are in the superior position to somebody who has less education, right? I may not be, I may not feel that way, but if the overall kind of culture says that I have the power, I have to at least be aware that my client might come into that relationship feeling like the inferior, right? And then, just as I described before, that there might be ways that the client feels like they might have some superiority over me, that I may not agree with, but I just need to be aware of it. It doesn't mean that I am superior to somebody or somebody is inferior. It just means this is like what positionality is, that I have to understand that those um, dynamics exist. Okay, so moving on. So we're going to talk skill number 2. How are we going to build this working alliance? Well, it's really through the basic attending skills that you've probably started working on or have been working on in class or at your sites, right? So what these attending skills really are all about is that we're trying to create a kind of synchrony in this therapeutic relationship. So what is synchrony? So psychotherapy researchers have become interested in the synchrony of nonverbal behaviors, especially. So those body movements, your voice, your facial expressions, and those physiological indices, so like your heart rate, your respiratory rate, your skin conductance, like all of those factors, those behaviors, as well as your verbal behavior. So kind of how you use your language, like, are you going to use fancy schmancy language, or are you going to kind of talk like, more with the colloquialisms that your client might be speaking with. So all those things between therapists and clients can create or not create this idea of synchrony, that we are kind of doing this dance together and we're in sync with each other. Okay. So, for example, observers rated therapists as being more empathic when they and their clients matched on the pitch of their voice during counseling sessions. Right? So, I'm going to say that my guess is that you all are doing some of this pretty intuitively already. But what this means, and some of us do it with our kids, some of us do it with, just people out in the world when we're trying to maybe help de-escalate a situation, that when we match and we kind of are speaking, at the same pace and at the same pitch as our clients, it kind of lends to this idea that we are matching, right? Now, sometimes we might want to, if somebody's super dysregulated, we might then want to speak in a softer tone, in a lower tone, to kind of get them back in sync with us. But this is really what synchrony is all about, is trying to get to a place where we can match each other. So synchrony between therapists and clients' body movements was also positively associated with the quality of the therapeutic relationship, right? Again, might be something that you're like, duh, but I think it can be important to remember when you're in those having one of those days where you're super busy and you're running from one thing to another, and maybe your nonverbals or your body movements are indicating that your mind might be elsewhere. right? That the more that your client can feel like, we are both in this room together and present together, it's gonna positively affect the therapeutic relationship. Okay, so what are the attending skills? So there are a lot of them, but these are a few that I want us to kind of focus on today. So some of the attending skills that we're going to work on are giving approval, providing some sense of reassurance, and we're not going to do it all the time. We're not going to like validate and approve of everything, but occasional, if it really does seem like that client is needing that support, like that makes sense to me why you did that or why you reacted that way. So too much can come off as like weird, right? It can come off as like, oh, well, you're just saying, what I want to hear, and I'm not sure that makes me trust you. But then too few reassuring statements can also feel unsupportive, right? So we want to find a balance in kind of offering reassurance. So body posture, so leaning slightly forward in a natural pose, right? Like, so I'm leaning forward, but maybe I'm not like totally in your face. But also, being aware of, I have clients who will like sit as far away as possible from me. So I'm aware that if I like move to be closer to them, that can lend itself to like, this feels uncomfortable for me. So this is something that again, there's a dance here, right? Like what's going to make you feel comfortable? I'll often ask, clients, offer them they can sit wherever they want, where would you be comfortable, right? So that's what I do. So leaning, in and getting in their face might feel threatening, right? But also kind of being more slouchy and kind of not being attentive enough could also be pretty off-putting because it may make you look uninterested, right? So the use of disclosure, as I said, a few slides ago, if a client is needing specific support, or if it's a way for you to kind of instill some hope, some disclosure is can be appropriate, right? Especially if you have some similar background with your client, or been in a similar situation, right? So if your client comes and says, my kid is constantly slamming their door in my face, you might just say like, oh, I totally get it. I've been there, right? Um, but obviously, too much self-disclosure can kind of feel like, okay, who's in therapy here, right? Is this for you? Or is this for me? So this is, again, part of that art, like knowing when it's appropriate and when it's not. Head nods, can convey understanding. I will tell you that I used to, I had to record all my sessions and I would watch them like on fast forward to get to the part that I wanted my supervisor to see. And my head would be bouncing up and down. So one of the things that I recognized was that I was constantly nodding and that I think it made some clients feel kind of uncomfortable. And right, like if you're always nodding, it might also feel like when you stop nodding, what does that mean? Right? Like, oh, did I just say something that made you, made my therapist, feel weird? So just be kind of aware of like what your body, what your head is doing. Interruptions, we want to avoid them as much as possible, right? So, there have been times where I won't say anything for the first 20 minutes of a session because it's clear that there's something that happened or something that's going on that the client needs to be able to tell this whole story, right? And I can tell that just telling the story is having a calming effect or having some kind of therapeutic effect. So it's not in anybody's best interest for me to interrupt at that point and interject. So I've also had clients who, after a couple of sessions of, 50-minute sessions where I've not been able to get a word in edgewise, I'm recognizing that, oh, this might be something that other people are experiencing too. And so I might need to interrupt and stop that kind of, flow of information, that fire hose of information. So I can even just point out that they're making it hard for other people to have a dialogue with them, right? So talking over a client or completing their sentences, in general, avoid it, right? Because often when you finish somebody's sentence, um, it starts to feel like you're not giving them a chance to explain themselves. That you know, in an effort sometimes to like say, oh, I really get it, I totally get it. You might finish a sentence and then they're like, that's actually not what I was going to say, right? So we're going to try to avoid that. And then finally, we're going to be talking a lot more about silence, but um, this I think can be a very challenging skill to practice and to learn, especially in the beginning phases. Again, most of us have been socialized to make people feel comfortable, and oftentimes silence makes people feel uncomfortable. So it can take a minute to really understand that, you know, if I let that silence just unfold in the session, most of the time the client is using that silence to think, to maybe understand what is happening, or maybe I've just said something that really landed in a way that they hadn't considered before. Um, it can also, you know, be anxiety provoking if you've got somebody who comes in and they're not sure what to say, right? Like I've definitely had clients where um, no matter what I've done, they that silence, they're waiting for me to break it. And, you know, so you have to really figure out, like, what is the silence about? Is it that I'm super anxious and I don't know what's happening and I need you to talk because I can't talk? Or is it I need a minute to really process what's happening or and feel my feelings? Okay. Okay. So skill number 3, these are just your basic questioning skills. So, you know, we're really going to try to listen to understand and not fix. And this can be a challenge if you're really good at fixing problems. Most of you are, right? So we want to try to listen to understand what the client is feeling, what the client is experiencing, and not be too quick to say, oh, I know just the thing you should do, or have you tried this, or have you tried that, right? And I know that y'all know that um, that's not helping. But I also know that many of us come to this work because that was the role we played in our families. We were the fixers. So this is something that I really want y'all to be thinking about as we're building our skills. Okay. So, you know, just kind of an example of listening to understand versus listening to fix. So instead of saying, do you think your partner wishes you would drink less? Right? Because you're kind of inserting or leading this kind of idea that, like, maybe if you drank less, you wouldn't have all these problems, right? Versus, what's it like for you when your partner gives you the silent treatment, right? So you're telling me that, like, you know, when you come home and maybe you're intoxicated, your partner just checks out and doesn't want to talk. Um, you know, rather than me suggesting, like, well, maybe then don't drink so much, right? Really try to get a sense of, like, what is that like when you're not connecting with your partner. Okay. We want to ask follow-up questions. So how did you react when your partner wouldn't talk to you? Right. So that's kind of following up on this idea of it sounds like this was hard, right? It sounds like you were really angry. How did you cope with those feelings for the rest of the night? Right. So again, you know, we've established that you were angry. My follow-up question is, how did you cope with that anger? Okay, so how did you react? How did you cope? That's kind of, those are very common ways that I tend to ask follow-up questions. Okay, and then I know that I'm sure you've talked about this in other classes, but we really want to avoid the closed questions. So does this process work for you? Is a yes or no answer. Did you speak to Jane? Yes or no answer. Was it a good experience for you? Yes or no answer. So the more open-ended questions, how and what. It's often why you hear me say, right? It's a very open-ended way of giving you space to give me more information about what you just said. You know, I don't want to misinterpret what you just said by just like repeating it back to you, maybe, you know, making an interpretation of my own. I want you to tell me more. So I'm going to open that up to you, to the client, and give them space to offer more information. Okay. How do you feel about this process? How did that conversation go? What did you like or dislike about that experience? Right? So how or what versus anything that elicits a yes no response. Okay, so I just wanted to watch. I thought this was a pretty good this was a pretty good example of how open-ended questions can be helpful.
This video is a short simulated counseling session demonstrating the basic communication skills of asking questions and probing for concreteness.
Good to see you again, Terry. I have the forms that you filled out last time about types of work you might be interested in. Did you want to continue our discussion about work?
Well, yeah, I guess so. I mean, I have so much on my mind that I guess it doesn't make a difference what we talk about.
Can you tell me a bit about what you're concerned about?
I mean, I do need a new job. I'm bored at work all the time and I barely make enough to make ends meet. My job is only part-time, but I'm just worried a lot about everything that's going on at home right now.
What's going on at home?
Well, like last week, I talked about Sam, and I made it seem like things are great between us, but they're really not. Things are pretty screwed up, actually.
What do you mean when you say screwed up?
Well, lately it just seems like all Sam wants to do is just go out and party. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm okay with partying and everything, but just not the way that Sam has been doing it. It's to be honest, the situation is a bit of a mess at this point.
And Sam's partying getting to be a bit too much for you?
Yeah, to be honest, it's just really messing up with my work. You know, I stay up late at night, worried about when Sam's gonna come home. So the next day at work, I'm all tired and grumpy. Um, the money is going, so I can barely keep up with our finances. Um, and then when Sam is home, all they can talk about is, you know, when they're going to go to the next party, and otherwise they're just sleeping.
When did you notice this change?
About 2 months ago, the restaurant closed and Sam lost their job.
And how has this been impacting you?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't even know why I'm there anymore at times. But I guess this is what a relationship is supposed to be. I don't know. I'm really confused. Um, I never lived with my birth family because of, all the drinking and stuff. Uh, I was in and out of foster homes, so I don't really know. I don't really have a good idea of what a good relationship is supposed to be like. Um, I guess there are things that I like about being with Sam.
Mm-hmm. Could you share an example of that? What you like, or what some good times might be like?
I don't know. Uh, we like getting out of the city. Sometimes we just hop on a bus and we go on hikes. There's this couple that we've known for years, and we really like to hang out with them. We cook a good meal. I don't know. Sometimes it's just nice to sit around at home, but just those simple things.
Mm-hmm. Have you been able to have much of those kinds of times lately?
No, uh, we don't have money for fun these days, unfortunately.
Have you tried talking to Sam about this?
Yeah, I've tried, but I didn't do a very good job. It just all fell apart. Actually, it always falls apart when I try to talk about what I'm feeling.
What does that mean when you say falls apart?
Like I'm able to start good, and then it just I don't get very far.
Hmm. Could you give me an example of a time when that happens, when it falls apart?
Well, like the other night, I tried to talk to Sam about the partying. I talked to them about being worried about our finances, our money. I tried to talk to them about how they have no energy to look for work because they're hungover a lot of the time. I started to have this conversation, and within a minute, I just I I got really afraid that they were going to get mad at me, so I just stopped myself. I shut up and I said everything's fine.
Perhaps you're starting to feel that Sam doesn't care about your concerns.
I worry that he's going to get angry with me, and I don't really know why, but yeah, there's that feeling I have.
Well, what do you think you would need to be able to have that conversation and to share those feelings?
I guess just finding the right words for it and maybe the right time. I'm just really not very good at these conversations.
Do you have an idea of when might be the right kind of time?
Well, next Tuesday we have a plan to walk around the seawall, so maybe then.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And how about, do you have any ideas of how you might start to frame that conversation?
So you kind of get an idea of kind of, they labeled some things closed questions that I may have said were more open. But you can kind of see like there's some of the questions that she asked were they elicited a bit more information from the client than others. I also like maybe if you want to take a minute to talk about how well did the counselor do in terms of some of those other attending skills. Do you feel like that this client is building a working alliance with the therapist, right? Maybe just think about it. I know when they have to do these videos, I'm sure they're nervous, but just kind of what went well and maybe what you would have changed if you had been the therapist. Worth thinking about. Okay, so the therapist in that video did kind of practice or show you what those probing for concreteness looks like. But it also, another way that we kind of talk about that is paraphrasing, right? So, something that I might, so probing for concreteness is like, can you explain when you say everything got all messed up, right? Or this is bullshit, right? Like I often will have to ask clients, like, can you help me understand what bullshit means, right? So paraphrasing is a really important part of what we do in order to make sure we're understanding and in order to make sure that the client feels heard. So not only are we summarizing what they're saying, but we're also kind of checking in with them to make sure that we're on the right track. So it sounds like you and your partner are a bit stuck right now. Does that sound right? Or you could also say, I'm hearing that you're worried that this is unfixable. Is that right? So, right, like, so you're kind of taking everything that they're saying and summarizing and paraphrasing kind of not just the content, but the feeling too. So now let's switch gears. So here's what we're going to do. I know the word role play makes people feel all kinds of ways, but trust me, it's going to be great. And you're going to get used to it, and it's going to help you practice things and help you kind of figure out, like, are these words that I would actually say, or how would I say these words in a way that feels more natural to me? So here's some tips for an effective role play for the person who is actually going to be playing the client. We're going to break you up in groups, and we're going to have one person be the social worker, one person be the client, and then one person is going to be an observer. So these are some tips for the client. So think less about acting. I know most of you, some of you have some acting experience, but it's less about putting on this like fabulous performance and more about you really trying to embody the client and try to tap into how it would feel to be this client. Okay, that's kind of going to be driving this role play. Try not to throw too many curveballs. Like you're not going to be like, for the purposes of this exercise, we do not want you to be a super hard client, right? So we want you to give the social worker something to work with, right? Like that you're going to answer questions, not just kind of remain stone-faced or not evade questions, okay? And then also for today's exercise, we're going to ask that you be pretty cooperative. We might have clients in the future that are less cooperative, but for today, you can be, pretty cooperative. Okay? Okay, so now we're going to practice. Everybody take a breath. Okay? So this is the client that some of you will be playing the client and some of you will be working with him. So Rick Dalton, this is his very first session. And he is coming in. His whole family has agreed to do some group therapy. You'll meet other members of his family in the future. But Rick is 45. He's white. He's married to Marisol. And she has 2 daughters, and he's the stepfather to these 2 daughters. They also have 1 son together who's 5. Okay, so you are going to get, we're going to number you off, count off. And all of the people who are, oh, okay, before we do this. So this is Rick. So here's what's going to happen. So you're going to meet with Rick, if you're the social worker, for a 45-minute session. So this is what we want to do. I really want you to kind of settle in to what it feels like to do, most sessions are 50 minutes, but to do a lengthier session, okay? Because it's a little different than doing a 10-minute role play, right? So we're going to meet with Rick for a 45-minute session. The social worker, I want you to read through the brief that you are going to get about Rick. You're going to review confidentiality and limits to confidentiality, because this is an initial session. And if you need help with that, we will offer help. You're going to explain what you hope to accomplish in this first session, right? So kind of explain, like, what is this session all about? Kind of what you're hoping will happen. And then kind of join with Rick on figuring out what he wants to have happen. And then you're going to be practicing these attending skills, building a working alliance, and using those basic questioning skills, right? So we're really going to focus on these. So I'm going to ask that you try to avoid making any kind of big interpretations, or trying to, maybe you're not going to gather so much information about Rick's childhood today, right? This is really about building trust today. Really kind of, getting to know each other. Okay, if you are Rick, you're going to also read through your brief, and you are going to put yourself in Rick's shoes as best you can and role play as Rick. Okay, that's your job. Okay, if you are going to be an observer, we're going to give you a form. We're going to give you a worksheet so you can write down specific things that the social worker said or did that you felt were particularly helpful. Okay, what nonverbal cues, what kind of attending skills did the social worker use to, and how did they, from your perspective, affect Rick? And was there anything that didn't seem to land? Okay, anything that didn't seem to land in the session that you might want to let the social worker know about? Okay, all right. And then in the debrief, we're going to come back together. Well, first you're going to debrief in your triads, and you're going to be reflecting on what you liked or what you didn't like about the session, what you wish you had said or done, what felt the most or least comfortable. Rick, you're going to talk about how you felt in the session. What did your social worker say that was especially helpful? And what did your social worker miss, maybe? And then the observer is going to talk specifically about what the social worker said or did, like we said on the feedback form. How did the social workers use their skills? Give your social worker some feedback on what skills you saw happen. And what specifically could that social worker do differently next time? Related to maybe what didn't land. Okay. So all of these debrief questions are on your, the brief that you're going to get either by the brief for the social worker or for the client. Okay. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to count up to 3. All the 1s are going to gather and you'll get your brief. All the 2s are going to get together and you'll get your briefs. And all the 3s are going to get together and you're going to get a feedback worksheet. Okay, so what we're going to have you do is we're going to have you meet for your 45-minute session. And then for 15 minutes after that, we will, so be sure to set a timer so you know when the session's over, which will also kind of help you keep track of when you need to kind of start wrapping things up. So work on those things. And then we want you to debrief in the triads. Okay, so you're going to go through those debrief questions in the triads for 15 minutes. Okay, so after you do that, take a break, do what you need to do, but we need you back in the big room by 2:45. And then we will kind of do a large group debrief on the whole process. Okie doke. Okay. So this will be after you do all that. We're going to ask you to stick around for your mentors. They should be arriving around 3 o'clock. But then they know that you're going to be doing all this and that you're going to be finishing up by 3. So then you're going to meet with your mentors between 3 and 3:15, and they've been instructed they don't have to keep you hold you hostage here. You can go do whatever you want. So we just want, as a group, for you to meet with your mentors. Okay? All right, y'all. Have fun. Do good work. I can't wait to hear how it goes. Thank you so much.